If you did not document something, then it did not happen. This is something that you learn in nursing school, something you should have been taught by now, something that everyone should know at this point in time. However, you run into this quite often in the field. You know, when you're on the floor, you actually run into this quite often. I myself am not really guilty of this. I do this at times. There have been things that I have done and not charted, yes, you know, definitely more so in my younger days, you know, in my new grad days, but it'll happen every now and then. Let me give you some real life examples of not charting things. Now, mainly on paper, you know, with the advent of the induction of the computer charting, it's a little bit harder on medications, but I have seen vancomycin not charted as to what time it was run. It was IV vancomycin. So, as many of you know, vancomycin is one that you have to have a trough. You have to have a peak and a trough, because you don't want your levels for the vancomycin to get haywire. You got to keep your vanc levels. You got to do your labs for vanc quite a bit. And I've come into a shift and seen vancomycin hung to the IV pump, maybe empty, who knows, might have an air bubble in it, and it makes that da-ding, da-ding, da-ding sound. We actually had one that played hot cross buns. Anyways, that's beside the point. You come in, you see the vancomycin. You look at the, we always put a sticker, our little policy was put a sticker on the line, on the tubing, that says your name and the time that you ran it. There's no name nor time that it was ran. Great, let's check the computer, let's check the paper. What time was this ran? Oh, it's not charted. So it looks as if this vancomycin was never run. However, I see it hooked to the patient, hooked to the IV or the PICC line, wherever it is, and there's no information as to when this vancomycin actually got run. Great. So, documentation on that would have saved me a ton of time. I remember dealing with that. Man, it took me forever to get that straightened out. I had to call a doctor, had to look at 12 hours past the time that it was actually documented that it was gave, because it was like a Q12 hour medication to run. They were right there at me. And it was, you know, I couldn't find it. You know, it took me a little while to figure out what time that IV was potentially run. And it took a little while. And like I said before, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. On paper, that vancomycin was never given. Never. On paper. However, because I ran into the situation that I ran into, I knew that it had been run. I should know when. So, document it, or it didn't happen. Let's just say this, for instance. This, I've never ran across this, but I will say this. If you get a verbal order from a physician, let's just use vancomycin again for an example. You get a verbal order for vancomycin. Physician calls you, or you call the physician, or whatever it may be, says, hey, start patient XYZ on vancomycin at 0-100 hour, Q12 hour, peak and trough, Q6 hour in between. Okay, that's probably a fairly standard order depending on your policy and procedure. Yeah, that's about right. You say, okay, I will go ahead and I will start this vancomycin. And you go ahead and you start this vancomycin and you hit the IV exactly the way the IV is supposed to be hit. And you do everything beautiful. Everything that you just did is right on the money for what the physician had said. Well, then you and that physician now leave. You've run your vancomycin, let's say that you ran it at midnight, 0-100 hour, and you DC'd it at 6 a.m., 0600, and all of a sudden the next shift comes in at, let's just say 7, and you do 7 to 7, and the vancomycin's been DC'd, and you didn't document any of it. You documented nothing. You and that physician both roll out. You know, it's a possibility. Typically, I will say this, typically physicians worked a little bit different, so there was a little bit of overlap. In any case, in any case, back to our theory, back to our story. Vancomycin's been run one time. You ran that vancomycin at midnight, you deseated at 6 a.m. and didn't document a thing. Not only now is the lab not going to get the vancomycin levels, the peak and trough, but the shift coming in isn't going to know a thing about it. You've deseated. You may or may not mention it in report. You may say, oh, I ran vancomycin on this person, and the nurse coming on says, oh, well, that's good, but you failed to document it, and this nurse may or may not remember that you told them this in report, and all of a sudden this patient no longer gets vancomycin anymore because that verbal order is just gone. It's just, it's gone away. Document, document, document. Now that's kind of a situation that's unlikely to happen because you still have to go through pharmacy, you still have to go through, you have to have a pharm tech bring you the medications, or someone from the pharmacy bring you the medications. You have to check them in, things like that. So that's a little bit of a far-fetched scenario. I will say, yes, that vancomycin story is a little bit far-fetched, but if you don't document it, it could actually happen, or something like that could actually happen. You never know. So always document your stuff. If you feel like you didn't document your stuff, go back at the end of the day and check your stuff. I write myself little notes throughout the day. I work with another lady who will document things like 4 times because she writes them all on a piece of paper, and then she goes back and does it in the computer, because we're on computers. But she documents it like 2 or 3 times. She will write that thing down like mad crazy. But her documentation is always done. I will leave myself little notes to remind myself, did I document this? Check this. Did you document that? So I can keep up with it. Because if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Remember my vancomycin story? I gave the vancomycin in my story, but because I didn't document it and the physician is now gone, that patient's no longer getting vancomycin anymore. It's just gone. So, always, always, always document your stuff. Document. Alright. Hope it helps. Thank you much.